Hello everybody and welcome back to another new vlog. Thank you for joining me once again. You'll see today it's not pouring with rain. In fact, I'm having a bit of a job to try and find a decent spot where there's a bit of shade so I don't overexpose this video footage. But today's just really a quick channel update because there've been a few upgrades to what I was doing since I started 2022. I talked at the beginning of the year about New Year's resolutions and what I intended to do going forward during 2022. First of all, I talked about setting up a website so that I could sell products and services, prints, workshops, that kind of thing. Well, that website is now up and running. I've managed to get that sorted. I will be updating it and adding more and more content and more features as the year progresses, but essentially the website is up and running, and I will leave a link in the description of this video as well. So if you've got time and if you feel that way inclined, please go and have a look at my website. If you remember, and if you watch the New Year's resolution vlog, you will know that I was also considering how I go about upgrading some of the lenses and the kit that I have now. Last summer I bought a mirrorless camera, the Canon EOS RP. Up until then I'd been using digital SLR cameras, and the mount on the old SLR cameras is different to the mount on the mirrorless cameras that I'm using now. So the idea was to continue using the old lenses that I got by purchasing an adapter which goes on the front of the camera, and then the lenses can be adapted to that camera, and then in the future then it's just a case of upgrading the lenses to the newer RF mount rather than the old EF mount. Initially I've been doing that for the last few months or so. Spent probably about 9 or 10 months now using an EF to RF adapter so that I can actually use the old EF lenses on my RF mount camera. But in the last couple of days I've purchased my first RF mount lens. Now there's quite a bit to tell you about this one. First of all, I've already got the lens. I wanted to do a little bit of a comparison test on those two lenses. The EF 1.8 50mm lens and the RF version of that lens. So I've got them both with me today, and I'm simply going to take a few shots, and I'll take one with the EF version and then I'll take one exactly the same with the RF version. I don't really intend to be out for very long today. Probably just shoot 3 or maybe 4 different compositions where I've got one of each, an EF and an RF version, and then I'll get back to the computer, get those images on the computer, and I'll show you some of the comparisons that I found between the images. I've managed to take the first shot now, and like I say, there are 2 separate shots. One is the EF version, 50mm EF, and one is the 50mm RF version, and I've focused from where I'm standing just on the very front of this bridge behind me in both cases. So I'll have a look at those when I get them back to the computer, and then we'll compare and contrast the 2 images together. Tree behind me, lying across the path, look at that. Obviously I'm going to have to take a photo of this, but just out of interest, this path here running up underneath this tree is the path that I've just walked up, and I actually walked off the path and around through this cluster of trees behind me across to this point here so I could avoid walking underneath that tree. Just as we look at it, I don't know how well you can see, just where my finger is now, there's another branch sticking just out of the front of that tree, which has kind of got a bit of a curl and a curve to it, and if you're walking up the path from the other end, you don't actually see that branch until you get almost level with the tree. So whilst I might have been alright walking underneath it, if I hadn't noticed that branch, I probably would have knocked myself out on the branch as I tried to get back up after walking underneath the main part of the tree. In actual fact, while I was stood here and walking around that little bit of woodland through here, a guy came up on his bike and he came up the path, and he obviously hadn't seen that branch either. Luckily he'd got his helmet on, but as he came up and ducked underneath the tree, he just spotted that branch, and I said to him, "You want to be careful you don't knock yourself out on that, mate." And he said, "I don't blame you for walking around it." Whilst faffing about around here trying to capture those images, I quickly turned round and found that just a few yards ahead of me, probably about 20 or 30 yards ahead of me, there are several of the Exmoor ponies hanging around. So I might take a walk up there and see if I can capture a shot of those as well, reading some video footage. This bridge behind me is kind of ironic in this landscape. All around me we've got trees and woodland, and it's all very quiet and peaceful. But then just around here we've got this bridge here, which is a railway bridge that runs through the park. I like the mushroom painted on the side of it. Now let's see if I can pick that up for you. Just here on the far side of it, there's a little bit of blue paint that you can see just there, and there's a mushroom underneath it that's been painted on. So that's kind of the image that I want to go for, that bridge with that mushroom painted onto it. So I'm going to set this one up and take this shot as well. So I am now back at the computer and I have the images open in front of me, and the first thing I notice really is that there's a very slight difference in the angle of view when you look through these images. So if I scroll through these images now, and we'll see exactly what I mean. Here with the first image, as I scroll through to the second one, you can see there's a very slight difference. I'll scroll back so you can see that. Just take a look at this little bit of branch on the very far left hand side of the image, and also keep an eye on this bit of branch here on the right hand side of the image. And as I scroll to the next one, that angle of view changes very, very slightly. It's almost unnoticeable. And the same thing happens with the other images as well. So I have this image here, and then of course that alters again slightly. And as you can see, it's just the screen is just jumping slightly as if it's moving from one angle of view to another, which is very, very slightly different in each case. Now the reason for that, you can see that again in the bridge image as well. You can see how that just takes a little bit of a jump as I scroll through those images. And the reason for that is purely and simply because I'm switching between the EF 50mm lens and the RF 50mm lens. And when I switch between those, I have to remove the adapter that I'm using for the EF lens and not use it for the RF lens. And what that means is that the adapter itself is only very, very small, but it's creating a very, very slightly different angle of view to the RF lens. And you can see that in the images there. So I've got the first two images opened up here using Adobe Lightroom to compare the two images. I'm going to show you a couple of things here that I just wanted to really point out. I'm going to go through each of the different images that I photographed in order to make those points about the differences between these images. So initially, the first thing you can see, once again, if you look on the left hand side here of this image, you'll notice that thin bit of branch just sticking up there, and on the right hand side you've got this thin bit of branch again. If you look over onto the right hand image, in the left hand side, that little bit of branch is slightly further in from the left hand edge of the image, and on the right hand side you might not be able to tell quite as easily because there's a larger distance from the edge to the tree. But this bit of tree here, this branch here, is slightly further in from the right hand edge of the image than this bit here in the left hand image. And again, that's purely and simply down to the slightly different angle of view that we get because of the addition of that adapter that I've had to use. But as well as that, what you notice with these two images in particular is there's a very slight difference in the exposure. Now, that's nothing at all to do with the lenses themselves. It's purely and simply that while I was taking these photos, in between switching between the EF 50mm lens, which you can see here on the left hand side, and the RF 50mm lens, which is on the right hand side, the sun decided to peep out from behind the cloud it was behind, and it's just very slightly brighter on the tree here and through the path and across the bridge and so on. So that's the only difference there with those two images. But I'd like to zoom in a little bit closer, and I want to have a look at the front of the bridge just here, the very front on the right hand side of the bridge. That was my point of focus in each case. So I'd like to zoom in and see how much difference there is between the two images there. So here we go. I'll just move that over slightly because it makes it a little bit easier. There's some writing here on the bridge itself, on the wood. May have been stamped in, or it may have been just written in using a permanent marker by somebody. But basically you can see in the left hand side image, that's the EF version of the image, it seems to be a little bit sharper than in the RF version of the image. Now that may even just be down to my focusing when I was switching between lenses. And again, you can see just here in the texture of the wood on the left hand side, it's very, very slightly sharper than the texture of the wood on the right hand side. But again, that's also been affected very slightly by that slightly different exposure when the sun started to show itself a little bit more in the second image. But you can also see how that exposure affects this right hand side of the right hand image as well. In the left hand image you can see there's no glare on the wood at all, but in the right hand side image that glare is very, very obvious, as you can see, and it makes a very clear difference. And that's just something that I noticed as I was taking those two images. As I move to the next pair of images, again we've got the EF 50mm on the left hand side and the RF on the right hand side of this comparison. And as you can see, once again, you can tell that there's a very slight difference in the angle of view, as you can tell by looking at this tree on the right hand side of the right image. That's the RF version. The gap at the bottom between the bottom of that tree and the right hand edge of the image is very slightly wider than the gap on the left hand image, as you can tell. And again, you can see it at the top as well. There's just a little bit of a gap just in the corner there, the top right hand corner, between the tree and the edge of the image. And in the left hand image, the EF version of the image, there's no gap at all. In fact, the left hand edge of the image just slightly overlaps the tree itself in the corner. So that's quite an obvious one. But also, as I zoom in, which I'm going to do now, I did notice that there's a bit of a difference with the focus again, and I'll move around the image and show you what I mean by that. And again, this could just be down to my focusing whilst I'm switching between the lenses, or it could actually be something to do with the quality of the lens itself. I'm not entirely sure, but it is fairly obvious when you look at these two images side by side. First of all, if you look at this little bit of tree behind the main tree here, in the EF version of the image, that is slightly blurred. Now, like I say, I'm not really sure whether that's down to my focusing or whether it's down to the quality of the image. But if you look at the right hand side image, the RF version, that seems to be a lot sharper. As I move further up the image, you can tell there's a little bit more sharpness in the main tree on the right hand side image. That's the RF version of the image. but it is only a very small amount of difference, and I'm not sure if the difference in this part of the tree, the main tree, is as noticeable as the difference between the tree further back in both images. So I'm not totally sure if the image quality is that much better. It looks as though it is a little bit better, but again, it could just be down to my focusing during the switch between the two lenses. Once again, with this third image, I'm looking at the two versions of the image side by side, and once again, it's very obvious that there's a very slight difference in the crop with these two images, and you can tell that in the right hand side image, where you've got a bit of a gap between the bottom of the path and the bottom of the image itself, and then in the left hand image you've got less of a gap between the bottom of the path and the corner of the image. So that's quite clear now that that's an issue because of that adapter that I have to use to look at capture the images with the EF lens rather than the RF lens. So once again, I can also zoom in a little bit, and as I'm zooming in, I can see there seems to be a little bit stronger image quality, a little bit more sharpness in the RF version of the image once again. And I'm looking at this particular tree just above and behind the gate here. There's this tree here, and it obviously looks as though there's a little bit more sharpness in that image. And again, that may just be down to my focusing when I was changing the lenses, switching between the two. So I'm going to move out now and see if I can have a look at that mushroom that was on the side of the bridge, because that may even give me an even better example of what I'm trying to achieve here. So as I zoom into that mushroom that I was looking at, there seems to be quite a lot of detail in it anyway, but as I look at the right hand image, that's the RF version of the image, that seems just that little bit sharper than the EF version. And like I said before, that could easily just be down to my focusing when I'm switching between the two lenses, but as you can see, there's very clearly a little bit more sharpness in the RF version of the image rather than the EF version. So as you can see, probably from my very basic test of those two lenses, it appears that the RF 50mm f1.8 lens is just very slightly sharper than the EF version. I'll continue to try that out and see if there is any real difference, because it may just have been that on this occasion I just wasn't getting the focus quite right myself each time I was using the EF lens. However, as I've tried 3 separate shots, I can't see that I would make that same mistake in every one of those 3 shots, to be quite honest with you. So it's got to be something to do with the lens itself. Hopefully you've enjoyed watching this vlog. If you have, please remember to give the video a thumbs up, and please remember to subscribe to my channel, and I will see you again on another vlog very soon. Bye for now.